Hi, I'm Shalene. The purpose of the task is to establish a specialized task force called the Australian National Department of Young Scholarly Researchers within the Australian Government Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. The country we study about is India. These are the topics we're gonna be discussed later. And I'm going to talk about economic of India and legal system. Now, I'm going to talk about Indian history and culture. India boasts a millennial history with notable contribution in mathematics, astronomy, architecture, and philosophy. The diverse traditional clothing, including sari, salwar, kameez, and dhotis, reflect regional and cultural influence. The Kumbh Mela, a monumental religious gathering held every 12 years, draws millions to cleanse in the scarce Ganga River. In 2019, Prayagraj witnesses a record-breaking turnout of over 49 million participants in a single day, attesting to the profound spiritual and cultural significance. Additionally, chess believed to originate in 6th century Indian as Chaturanga stands a testament to India's strategic ingenuity. What is globalization? Globalization is the increasing interconnectedness and interdependence of countries. It involves the exchange of goods, service, information, and ideas across borders. It is driven by factors like trade, technology, communication, and cultural exchange. People, goods, and information can move more freely around the world. It presents both opportunity and challenges for countries and society. What is political economic? Political economic is a field of society science that examines the relationship between political institutions and economic system. It studies how political decision, policy, and structure influence the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services within a society. India is for the political part. India is a democratic country due to three factors. First, free and fair election. Regular elections are held where citizens have the opportunity to choose their representatives. These elections are conducted in a transparent and fair manner. Second, rule of law. There is an independent judiciary that uphold the rule of law and ensure that government actions are consistent with the Constitution. Third, respect for human rights. Citizens have basic rights and freedom, including freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and protection against discrimination or persecution. Economic system. India is a mixed economic country due to three factors, including its law. First, private ownership. India provides the legal framework for entering into contracts. It ensures the individuals and business have the freedom to contract with one another, enabling them to define the terms and conditions of their business relationship. Second, government intervention promote fair competition and prevent anti-competition practice in the Indian market. It empowers the Competition Commission of India, which is CCI, to regulate and oversee competition-related matters. Third, public service and welfare. They provide a law to guarantee free and compulsory education to children aged 6 to 14 years. It mandates the provision of quality education in government schools and set standards for infrastructure and teacher qualification. Last part, legal system. India is a civil law country. They got contract law. Contract law was govern the information interpretation and enforcement of agreements between parties. It includes elements like offer, acceptance, consideration, and legality of purpose. The challenges of for firm establishing will be understanding and navigation legal requirements for valid contracts, interpretation, of contractual terms and timely enforcement of contracts through the Indian legal system. Property and they got property law. Property law deals with rights, interests, and ownership of real and personal properties. It covers aspects like land acquisition, land titles, and land use regulation. The challenges for firm establishing will be acquiring land for business operation, verifying clear titles and ownership of properties, and understanding regulation related to land ownership and use.
Thank you, Shirley. Hello, I'm Tang Huizhang, and my topic is the analysis of both economic development and human development level in India, which measure is greater important. Firstly, we will consider economic development. Countries very significant in their economic development level. There are two primary methods for measuring recent economic progress: gross nation income per capita and the purchasing power rating. Short form is GNI and PPP. GNI is considered a standard for measuring a country's economic activity, and also total income received by its residents annually. However, GNI can be misleading since they don't consider difference in the cost of living. According to the workbook 2022, we can find the GNI of India is $2,043.3. It is increased by 4.3% compared to last year. Well, GNI provides a basic understanding of a country's overall economic activity. It fails to account for the difference in the cost of living between different countries and the region. This is where PPT come into play. The second major method is purchasing power parity. Short form is PPP. PPP addresses gross nation income based on purchasing power, and the adjustment is called to the cost of living in the United States. During the adjustment process, PPP is used to address the purchasing power parity upwardly or downward for different countries based on whether their cost of living are lower or higher than those in the United States. PPP also has an impact on international business. PPP can assess the business in identifying potential market opportunities, specifically in regions with high disposable income, where residents are more likely to purchase their product and service. According to the workbook 2022, we can find PPP of India is equal to 8,210. The next, human development is used to measure the human development level of a country or region. The United Nations developed the Human Development Index, and this index is based on three measures to assess the quality of human life in different countries: life expectancy at birth, educational attainment, and a decent standard of living. HDI is equal to 0.633. The average life expectancy of people in India has declined from 69.3 to 67.2, and the level of education has dropped from an expected 11.9 to actually 6.7 years. In 2022, India's HDI ranking has fallen to 132 place. The last question: which measure is of greatest importance, human development or social economic development? I think human development is better than economic development because economic development has some limitations. For the economic development, it does not reflect different classes within a population. For example, Indians with middle class next a physical figure do not always tell the entire story. When we talk about economic activities, we often focus on transactions that are formally recorded. However, in reality, a significant portion of economic activities may occur in the realm of back or shadow economic, where this transaction typically take the form of an unrecorded cash transaction or barter agreement. Next, it only provides a static picture of development. For a more accurate analysis, it is important to consider the growth rate as well. So Human Development Index is better for reference. Thank you. Lastly, I would like to express my gratitude for Professor listening and the support. Thank you. My next member is Carissa.
Hi, I'm Carissa, and I'll be discussing the cultural difference between Australia and India. So India and Australia are both considered multicultural countries, so they don't really just adhere to one sort of culture. India is known for having incredible cultural diversity between languages, geographic regions, religious traditions, and social stratifications, which is some foreshadowing for Ronan and Shankar. And it's known as one of the most culturally diverse places in the world. So first we'll use Hofstede's cultural dimensions to describe this. So power distance. So first is basically how comfortable members of society are with power not being distributed equally amongst them. Australia ranked fairly low on this. So they got a score of 38, whereas India actually ranked quite high. They got 77, which just goes to show the difference being that Australians tend to care a little bit less in terms of how power is distributed, whereas Indians tend to care a little bit more, which will then follow up into our next topic, which is individualism and collectivism. So Australia has a very high individual score. So they're very individual. They're ranked 90 out of 100, whereas India had a sort of intermediate one at 48. You can actually just see this in the work culture in Australia with people wanting to be their own bosses, with the whole, like girl boss thing going around, people wanting to work on their own terms for themselves, for their own success. Whereas Indians, not so much, at least in my experience, I have not seen as much. However, both countries, as similarity for them at least, they are both masculine countries, intermediate masculine to make it more specific. This basically means that the ideas of, being successful, being wealthy, being rich, achieving well, flaunting their success and their wealth with like flashing brand names and driving nice cars, having nice houses, things like that, are both common between the two countries, both ranking at 61, which is Australia, and 56 for India. We'll move on to our next one, which is uncertainty avoidance, basically how willing people are to confront uncertainty or ambiguity. Australians, they have an intermediate uncertainty avoidance. So they got 51, whereas India had around 40, so sort of similar as well. They both show a medium-low preference for avoiding it. This can just be shown in culture, as in like both countries sort of have the idea like studying well, getting a good job, being able to provide for the family, put a roof over our heads, sort of idea. Now, indulgence and restraint. So indulgence basically refers to how well, like being able to enjoy life, being able to enjoy everything without having to deal with the social norms or being like oppressed, anything like that. So Australia is a very indulgent country. They got 71 out of 100, whereas India got a 26. This can also be shown through Australians sort of have that whole like fair dinkum, larrikin sort of attitude where they sort of don't really care about anything. They're sort of a little less serious. However, Indians are not as much so. This can even tie into how Australia is a developed nation, whereas India is developing, but they're not as developed, meaning that they don't really have that whole barrier between enjoying life and being able to like go on holidays, go and drive nice cars, sort of thing like that. And finally, long-term and short-term orientation, which is basically how much a culture honors their long-standing traditions. So Australia, very low, 21 out of 100, whereas India had 51 out of 100. This basically just goes to show that Indians like to keep their long-standing traditions going, whereas Australians don't really care about it. The second framework we'll be using is Ronan and Shankar's cultural clusters. Like I previously mentioned, the three main things being used are geographical location, language, and religion. So between Australia and India, they're already quite far apart. They're separated by an ocean. So there's already that sort of difference. And that's sort of also leads to how different the two cultures are. However, Australia is part of the Anglo-Caste cluster. Funnily enough, India should actually also be considered part of the Anglo cluster because they were under British rule for a while. However, because of their independence and because of the new culture that's developed after being part of the colonies, they've become part of the independent cluster. So very different in using this sort of framework. So we can see that Australia's main language is English. The main religion is Christianity, with 43.9% of the Australian population being Catholic or Christian, whereas India is much more variable in their results. India has 22 major languages and hundreds of dialects that are spoken through small towns, villages, different ethnic groups within the country, and 79.8% of India is Hindu. They place a lot of importance on their religion. Like, for example, if you go to a McDonald's there, they do not sell beef products. They will sell other variations that allow, people to honor their culture, which also ties into that whole long-term orientation. So thank you so much for listening to me today. I believe Emily is next to talk about the next topic. Thanks so much for listening.
Good evening, I'm Emily, and today I'm going to explain which industry India should specialize in when looking to trade with other countries according to Adam Smith and David Ricardo theory, and which the government of India should follow when engaging in international trade. First, I'd like to introduce on Adam Smith theory. Adam Smith, known as the father of modern economics, proposed the theory of absolute advantage. According to Smith, a country should specialize in producing goods in which it has an absolute advantage over another nations. Absolute advantage refers to a situation where a country can produce a particular goods more efficiently and with fewer resources than another country. Next, I'll be introduced in David Ricardo theory. David Ricardo introduced the theory of comparative advantage. According to Ricardo, even if a country does not have absolute advantage in producing any good, it can still benefit from international trade by specializing in producing the goods in which it has a comparative advantage. Comparative advantage is based on the opportunity cost of producing one good versus another. Here are some differences between Adam Smith and David Ricardo theories. Adam Smith, who emphasized on absolute advantage, which just means threshold be based on each country's unique strength, and the labor theory of value by Adam Smith in specialization and the division of labor in increasing overall productivity. And he also emphasized on static view, which means immediate benefits of specialization and trade. On the other hand, David Ricardo emphasized on comparative advantage, which just means trade should be based on differences in opportunity costs between countries. While the labor theory of value is, he used theory to explain how countries benefit from specializing in the production of goods. While he used dynamic view, which just means comparative advantage can change over time due to the shiftness in technology, resources, or labor force skill. In conclusion, India government should adopt a pragmatic approach that combines elements of both Adam Smith and David Ricardo's theory. It should assess its own economic strengths and weaknesses, the global market dynamics, and its long-term economic goals to determine which industry to specialize in for international trade. The specific strategy should be flexible and adaptive to changing economic conditions and opportunities. Thank you.
Thanks to Emily for sharing. After understanding the above, in order to better cooperate with India on trade, I will introduce the trade policy tools currently used by India and explain which scenario the tools suppose based on actual cases. India currently adopted 3 types of trade policy tools. In terms of tariffs, it adopts a unified naming system based on the Tariff Act of 1962. In addition to basic tariffs, there are also other tariffs such as comprehensive goods and services tax. India has recently increased import tariffs on certain goods. In terms of subsidies, Although the WTO requires a ban on export subsidies, some developing countries can make exceptions. Therefore, India provides export subsidies to certain specific industries, has a tax exemption and tax rebate system for exported goods, and provides market development assistance to some small and medium-sized enterprises. In terms of import quotas, due to the economic reforms in the 1990s and the requirements of WTO member states, India gradually abolished the import quota system and only retained import quota in agriculture products, steel, and some other industries. But it still used non-tariff barriers to control imports and certain goods. Although India's tariffs are currently on an upward trend, for Australia, India has adopted policies such as lowering tariffs and canceling import quotas to promote trade, which can support the new trade scenery. The new trade scenery believes that the country should expand the scale of production, increase the variety of goods, and meet differentiated needs in order to sell more products. And as the production volume increases, the unit production cost decreases. This can ultimately increase revenue from business activities. In 2022, in order to strengthen bilateral trade cooperation, the Indian government signed a free trade agreement called the ECTA with Australia and issued export subsidies. According to the agreement, 85% of Australian goods can be exported to India duty-free, and 96% of India imported products are tariff-free. By 2026, tariffs on the remaining Australian export products will be reduced by another 90%. And all of Indian products will be tariff-free. This pioneering agreement will save Australian exporters approximately 2 billion Australian dollars in tariff each year. Businesses are expected to save approximately 500 million Australian dollars in finished products import duties and manufacturing inputs. Through this initiative, both India and Australia can carry out a large-scale production activities. As the most populous country in the world, India is undoubtedly a huge market. According to data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics in 2023, after the signing of the agreement, Australians' exports to India increased by 42% year-on-year. According to the data from the Indian Ministry of Commerce, India's exports to Australia increased by nearly 7% year-on-year. Exports from both countries have grown significantly. It can be seen that by promoting free trade and reducing tariffs and non-tariff barriers, the country can increase the scale of import and export, expand overseas markets, meet more differentiated needs, promote production scale, and ultimately achieve the goal of profit growth. Therefore, free trade and the reduction of tariff and non-tariff barriers can reflect the benefits of economics of scale, which is an important concept in the new trade scenery proposed by Paul Krugman. To conclude, since India and Australia have signed a free trade agreement, which has greatly broadened the Indian market, local Australian companies can see the opportunity to expand overseas and increase return from scale. However, as the market scale expands, competition will become more intense, so it is both an opportunity and a challenge for local companies. Thank you for listening. Here are our references. Thank you for listening. Our group provides an analysis of 5 key issues that Australian companies will encounter when expanding into India. I hope that this will be helpful. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask.